Well, we've got lots to talk about. I noticed you had a few articles up here. What's been going on with technology this week, Matt?
Oh, yes, I love technology. Always and forever. Name that movie.
Well, I'm not going to name it, but we are going to start our
Hey,
podcast every
Put
time with
with
that.
that song. But if you know it, put it in the comments and we'll give you a shout out in our next podcast.
Well, they're going to shout out to you every time because it's our new theme song.
It's our new song. Forget the tech time song.
Yeah.
So, Computex is going on right now in Taiwan.
Oh.
And are you familiar with what Computex is?
No, but is it kind of like a big computer show, I guess, except for they get to eat at night markets afterwards, which makes me very jealous.
Yes, they do eat at night markets, and it looks like they've got some pretty decent weather there too at the time right now. So it's in Taiwan,
Mhm.
and Computex 2019, I don't know if it moves around, but it's really a big show to talk about computer chips, specifically processors, and then laptops and desktops that will be using those processors. Sometimes they'll talk about RAM, sometimes they'll talk about graphics cards, but usually the gaming stuff waits for E3, which is coming up in June. And so Computex is usually like the innards. So a lot of motherboards get announced there as well. So for game enthusiasts, it's kind of an exciting time. And since I've just started getting into building computers again,
Yeah, are you still doing that? Are you thinking about it?
absolutely, absolutely. I'm just trying to bide my time and see like what makes the most money in dollar sense because Dan, you and I both spawn from the same tree where we watch our dollars and it
We're
needs to be
cheap.
worth it.
Yeah.
We are cheap, and I also find that I'm drawn to the expensive components, and then I'm like, why? I mean, who cares if I'm playing P-Bug at like 14K and 120 frames per second, right? Like just drop it to 1080p and away you go. And I'm not a huge gamer. Like I'm not. Most of the games I play, like Civ 6. Civ 6 is a newer game and you need an okay graphics card, but it doesn't need to be smoking awesome. And you don't care about your frames per second because it's not all about reaction times because it's a strategy game. But anyways, still really exciting news came out of Computex, especially the keynote from AMD. And the key thing about AMD is they've been behind Intel for the last few
Mhm.
years. So when they first came out with their chips in, I think it was 2012, they really blew everybody away with how many cores they could put into their chips and how fast they could get them overclocking and then the price point. That's what it was all about. And back then, it was exciting to get an AMD chip. And they probably kept on top of it for a couple of years. But then I would say from about 2014 to 2018, Intel's had the show. They've been able to get their chips overclocking much higher. Even their base gigahertz is higher than what AMD has been having. And really, AMD's been more on the budget side of things, so they've still stayed cheaper than Intel, but for the enthusiast, it's just always been Intel, Intel, Intel until this year. And all the reviewers, all the people who are looking at this new 3000 series of chips that AMD has been announcing, they're like, Intel can't keep up. In fact, Intel tried to steal some thunder by announcing one of their mega overclocked i9 chips, and they're like, all these cores, all 8 cores are working at 5 gigahertz. And so they tried to steal the thunder, but they, even with that announcement, with this super awesome card that's probably going to cost $3,000, they could not keep it away from the news. So here it is. It's
Okay.
the 3000 series. So every year, AMD adds another 1,000 to it. So last year was the 2000 series. The year before that was the 1000 series. And the year before that was a zero. So here we are in the 3000 series. And then the next number shows how good the chip is.
Right.
So they've announced a 3700, a 3800, and a 3900. Now, the 3900 is the one that's blowing everybody away because, Dan, it has 12 cores.
And it's only 500 bucks?
What? You stole my better. Yeah, it's 500 bucks. Now that's the MSRP, the manufactured retail price that they recommend. So it most likely won't be 500 bucks when it first comes out, but AMD chips, they are able to get enough out there that it's only going to be a month or two and then they'll be down to MSRP. So you can get 12 cores and you can overclock this sucker and you can get it up to 4.6 gigahertz. And that's pretty smoking. All 12 cores at 4.6 gigahertz.
Dang.
And hyper threaded to 24 cores.
So I just want to step in here, and
Yes.
I bet there's a lot of people thinking, why would you ever want something that fast? I can play my games okay, but as YouTube creators, when we're compiling our videos, it takes time. It literally takes about 30 minutes on my newest MacBook Pro to do a 45-minute video for YouTube. And so all 12 cores going really quick would probably cut that a lot.
So your MacBook Pro's probably got an Intel chip in it.
Yeah, it does.
Is it an i7?
I think it's an
i5.
i5. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're so expensive. That's the problem with Apple. They're so expensive, and you got an i5, and it's all about the cores. And I think the i5 is sitting at 4 cores. And
It is. Yeah, it's just 4
yeah,
cores.
and then depending on the year, maybe you got 6 cores in it, but the i9s have 8,
Right.
and this one's got 12 cores.
Jeez.
Now there's room on the chip for up to 16. So that's the big rumor right now, and people are saying they've seen it, and maybe later on this year they're actually going to bring out a 16-core chip, so like 32 hyper-threaded cores. That's ridiculous. So the other amazing thing about this is it only uses 105 watts. Now, to give
That's
you
really good.
an example of what 105 watts gets you, that used to be their like 4-core chip at 105 watts. So now they're cranking out 3 times as many cores and they've got the same wattage. So amazing. And then as they go through, so the 3800 and the 3700, they're both at 8 cores and they're Ryzen 7. So that's the other thing I should tell you is these are all 7 level, like the 7 level on their score. So they've got a Ryzen 5 and a Ryzen 3, but the Ryzen 7s are the high-end gaming ones. And they're still so cheap, like $500 and you get 12 cores on their high-end chip. And so as you go lower, they use less wattage. And so the big news that they're talking about is why use an Intel chip, which is going to be burning 30 to 40% more wattage in a laptop in the future. And
Yeah, good point. And the other thing I wanted to mention is if you are mining Bitcoin, it's going to be a lot smarter for you to use something with less watts because then you're going to pay the power company less.
It's all about the dollars, absolutely. And so the wattage is huge. So the Ryzen 7 3800X, the X stands for overclockability, but you know what, Dan? Or actually, I think in this case it's extreme, and maybe only their 7 series gets the extreme. It's the selling hype. But this one is 8 cores, sitting at 3.8 gigahertz, overclockable to 4.5. It's 105 watts as well, and it's coming in at $399. So that's $150 cheaper than the Intel comparable. Oh, and to compare the 12 core one, Intel's competitor is a 9920X. It's going for $1,200 right now.
And it's not even as fast, right? And it doesn't have 12 cores.
Not even as fast, and it's 8 cores, not 12 cores. So ridiculous. And then the 3700X Ryzen 7 is coming in at $329, also has 8 cores, 3.6 gigahertz, overclockable to 4.4, and only 65 watts.
So
that's amazing.
I don't want to put a damper on this. I mean, I know AMD is awesome and they've been around for a while.
Yes.
One thing that I'm hesitant about with AMD is that there are some Linux distros that it just doesn't work as well. And there's other compiler issues if you're coding software. Even sometimes when you're playing games, I mean, there's just certain things that the CPU needs to have. I remember one time I had an AMD chip. It was a long time ago. Like they weren't as good as Intel at the time, but I had purchased it because it was cheaper. And I ran into situations where I would try and install a Linux distro or install some kind of a package on it, and it just wasn't compatible. Most of it was emulation. I was like emulating Super Nintendo games, or I was I don't know. I just like to tinker, and I found sometimes with AMD that I got stuck at a wall, you know? So if you're a hardcore gamer or if you really like to dabble with Unix, I don't know if this AMD chip is for you, even though it's cheaper.
I'd like to know if that's still an issue because I've done a lot of research on this and I haven't heard anything about the Ryzen series of chips. So Ryzen have been the ones that have for the last 3 years. So this is the third generation. I haven't heard anything about that. No complaints. The biggest thing that they've said is it's bang for buck better, but if you want higher gigahertz, always go Intel until now.
Okay, interesting.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I
I mean,
think
this was like 10 years ago when I
yeah.
was, doing emulation and stuff and
Mhm.
it would complain, but yeah, maybe they've got it all worked out.
Yeah, maybe our listeners can chime in on that, but I'd like to know, have you ever had quality issues with your AMD chips and are they within the last 3 years? Are they these Ryzen chips? Because I haven't heard any of that. And it sounds like in the future, a lot of people are saying your laptops are going to end up with AMDs, and that's pretty rare because most of the time it's Intel has been focusing on that. And so just a few other things. We'll quickly go through this because Intel tried to have a keynote as well, and it was not nearly as exciting as AMD's. The other thing is these are 7 nanometers, these chipsets that they're
Oh,
putting out
nice.
now. And
Yeah.
that is huge, 7 nanometers. To compare that, Intel just got down to 10 nanometers. So in their big thing, they're like, we got to 10 nanometers. But even when their VP was doing his announcement, he didn't do it with nearly as much excitement because they'd just been upstaged the night before with, we got 7 nanometers. like it's a big deal.
Do you
So
want to know how many nanometers my latest MacBook Pro is? It's 22.
22, you're
I
just
know.
bought that last year,
Three
Dan.
times. I know, 3 times the size.
Oh, that's ridiculous. So, Lisa Su is the CEO for AMD, and she also got up there and she said all these CPUs are 15% faster. Every single core is 15% faster than last year's, and 18% faster on multi-core. So, huge improvement just from second generation to third generation. And she also made the announcement, and we talked about this last week, I believe, that the PlayStation 5 is going to be using these chips. So AMD is not only taking care of the processor, but they're also doing the graphics card. So it's going to be a
Cool.
combination of the Navi GPU and Zen 2 CPU.
Nice.
Yeah. So the other thing is these are going to become available on July 7th. So 7/7. And you know why?
Why? Because it's 7 nanometers.
7 nanometers. They're really sticking it to
Guess what I'll
Intel.
be doing on the 22nd? Crying because mine is 22 nanometers.
2 nanometers, 3 times as big as these ones. And the other cool thing is these now support PCI Express 4.0. And that is double than PCI Express 3.0, which is at 1 gigabyte per lane. Now we're at 2 gigabytes per lane, so huge. So if these next generation graphic cards come out and they can handle Express 4.0, just imagine how much information you'll be able to just push from all your components into that motherboard. So it's looking like it's pretty exciting.
Well, just to give you an idea of how far they've come, the last time I bought a fancy video card, they didn't even have PCI Express 1. So now they're at
Uh,
4.
yeah.
That's pretty
Well,
cool.
it's the same thing, Dan. Last time I built my own computer and I was using thermal paste and I was trying to put like a fan on top of my chip, it was like 2010.
Okay.
Right? So we're talking almost 10 years since I've built a computer, and I'm really looking forward to building one with the kids and, just walking them through a motherboard and what's a PCI Express slot and what's it for and what's cache and, all those types of things that I think, we kind of need to know, especially if we end up in a zombie apocalypse and we got to rebuild the world again,
Yeah.
then yeah, we need to know these things.
Do you
So
remember in Jurassic Park when that family was like stuck and the raptors were after them and then that girl got to the computer lab and she knew how to use Unix.
she knew how to
She
use
saved
it.
the day, she rebooted the system. These are
And
life skills you need to know.
that was way more believable than when they hopped into Jeeps that were just sitting there forever. Oh, but that wasn't in the original Jurassic Park. It was in the next one. It was like 10 years later, and they're like, hey, this Jeep just starts up, no problem.
Yeah.
Maybe they can put a new battery, like they tried to be somewhat realistic, but it's like the fuel that has been sitting in there for 10 years. No,
In the hot Costa Rican sun.
that's not going to happen.